The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the familiar symphony of 1,000 different alien languages, all filtered through universal translators into a coherent cacophony of diplomatic discourse. Ambassador Zekthari of the Vorthan Empire adjusted his ceremonial robes, the iridescent fabric shifting through shades of deep purple and gold as he prepared to address the assembly. His 4 eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he gazed upon the central podium where the day's main spectacle awaited. Chained to a restraint platform that hummed with energy dampeners stood the last known human in the galaxy. Marcus Chun appeared unremarkable by most standards. Average height for his extinct species, brown hair streaked with premature gray, and dark eyes that seemed to hold depths that made even the most hardened alien diplomats uncomfortable. His clothes were simple prison garments, but he wore them with a dignity that irritated his captors. The human had been captured 3 months ago on the outer rim world of Kepler, 442b, apparently scavenging through the ruins of an old human research facility. When a Vorthan patrol found him, he offered no resistance, simply raising his hands and speaking in that oddly melodic human language that their translators struggled to properly interpret. The patrol captain had expected to find a terrified survivor, perhaps driven mad by decades of isolation. Instead, they found Marcus Chun, who seemed almost relieved to see them. Esteemed members of the Galactic Council, Zekthari began, his voice carrying across the vast chamber through advanced acoustic systems. Today we witness the end of a dark chapter in galactic history. Before you stands the final remnant of the species that once terrorized our peaceful galaxy with their endless appetite for war and conquest. A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled delegates. The Crystalline Hive's representative clicked their approval in harmonious chimes, while the gas-form entities of the Nebula Collective pulsed with colors that indicated satisfaction. Even the usually neutral Silicon Republic's ambassador allowed their optical sensors to glow slightly brighter, a sign of engagement with the proceedings. Marcus Chun stood silently, his expression unreadable. He had learned long ago that showing emotion to these beings was interpreted as either weakness or aggression, neither of which served his purposes. Instead, he let his gaze wander across the assembly, cataloging faces and species he had studied for decades. The irony was not lost on him that he probably knew more about galactic politics than half the delegates present. The human scourge that once spread across dozens of systems, leaving death and destruction in their wake, is finally reduced to this pitiful specimen, Zekthari continued, gesturing dramatically toward Marcus. No longer will peaceful colonies fear the sound of human war drums. No longer will mothers across the galaxy tell their offspring frightening tales of the pale demons who came from the 3rd planet of an unremarkable star. The crowd erupted in cheers, a cacophony of sounds that ranged from subsonic rumbles to ultrasonic whistles. Marcus observed this display with the detached interest of a xenobiologist studying specimens. These beings had convinced themselves that humanity had been some sort of galactic plague, but Marcus knew the real history. Humanity had indeed been expanding, but they had also been learning, adapting, and most importantly, preparing. Ambassador Yithmora of the Tentacled Confederacy slithered forward, her massive bulk undulating across the chamber floor. Her voice was like the sound of waves crashing against rocks, powerful and inevitable. This human stands as proof of the Council's wisdom in authorizing the cleansing campaigns 27 years ago. The systematic elimination of human colonies was necessary to preserve galactic peace. Marcus felt a familiar cold rage building in his chest, but his expression remained neutral. 27 years ago, he had been a young researcher working on a classified project in the Tau Ceti system. When the first cleansing fleets arrived, humanity had fought with everything they had. But the aliens had numbers, superior technology, and, most crucially, unity. Humanity's fractured governments and competing interests had made coordinated resistance impossible. I propose, continued Yithmora, that we make this creature's execution a public spectacle. Let every world in the galaxy witness the final death of the human threat. Let be broadcast on every communication network, a celebration of our triumph over chaos. The chamber erupted again, this time with even more enthusiasm. Delegate after delegate rose to voice their support for the proposal. Some suggested creative methods of execution that would properly symbolize the end of human aggression. Others proposed turning the event into a festival, with games and competitions to commemorate their victory. Through it all, Marcus remained silent. These beings had no idea what they were proposing to execute. They saw him as the last pathetic survivor of extinct species, but the truth was far more complex. For 27 years, he had been alone, but he had not been idle. The research facility where they had found him was not his hiding place. It was his workshop. As the debate raged about the specifics of his execution, Marcus allowed his mind to drift back to the early days after humanity's fall. He had survived the destruction of his research station by pure chance, hidden in a shielded laboratory deep underground when the orbital bombardment began. When he finally emerged, the galaxy had moved on. Human worlds were being repopulated by various alien species. Human technology was being studied and reverse-engineered, and human history was being rewritten to cast them as the aggressors in every conflict. But Marcus remembered the truth. He remembered the first peaceful contact missions, the attempts at trade and diplomacy. He remembered how quickly those overtures had been rejected once the aliens realized that humans had no unified government to negotiate with, no single leader who could speak for the entire species. The galaxy preferred dealing with hive minds, imperial dynasties, and collective consciousnesses. Individual human voices were seen as noise, chaos that needed to be eliminated. Delegate Chun. A voice suddenly cut through his reverie. Ambassador Zektheri was addressing him directly, using the name from his forged identification papers. Do you have any final words before the council votes on your execution? Marcus looked up, meeting the Vorthan's gaze with steady eyes. For a moment, he considered remaining silent. But these beings had made their choice 27 years ago, and now he would make his. I have a question, Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite the lack of amplification. The human vocal range was considered quite limited by galactic standards, but Marcus had trained himself to project. Zektheri's eye stalks twitched with amusement. A question? How wonderfully human. Always seeking knowledge, even in the face of death. Very well, creature. Ask your question. You speak of humanity as if we were some sort of mindless plague, Marcus said, taking a step forward. The energy restraint sparked but held. But I'm curious about something. In all your historical records, in all your documentation of the cleansing campaigns, did any of you ever wonder why humanity never used our greatest weapon? A confused murmur rippled through the assembly. Several delegates leaned forward in their seats, intrigued despite themselves. Zektheri's expression shifted from amusement to wariness. What weapon? The ambassador demanded. Human technology was primitive compared to our own. Your weapons were crude, your ships were slow, and your tactics were predictable. Marcus smiled, and something in that expression made several nearby delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. Oh, but you're thinking too small, Ambassador. You're thinking about the weapons humanity had developed by the time you decided to exterminate us. You're not thinking about the weapons we were developing. Impossible, scoffed the Crystalline Hive representative, their harmonic voice taking on a discordant note. We studied all human research facilities. We confiscated all human technology. There were no super weapons, no hidden arsenals. No, Marcus agreed. There weren't. But there were experiments. Research projects that your forces interrupted before they could be completed. Projects that were abandoned when the cleansing began, scattered across a dozen worlds, forgotten in the chaos of war. The chamber fell silent. Even the background hum of the life support systems seemed muted as hundreds of alien eyes focused on the lone human. 27 years, Marcus continued, his voice taking on a conversational tone that somehow made his words more menacing. That's how long I've been alone in this galaxy. That's how long I've had to think, to remember, to piece together fragments of research from 100 different projects. Do you know what human beings are particularly good at, Ambassador? Zektheri said nothing, but his four eyes never left Marcus's face. We're very good at holding grudges, Marcus said softly, and we're exceptionally good at finishing what we start. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Yithmora's booming voice broke it. Empty threats from a desperate creature. What could one primitive human possibly accomplish against the might of the galactic community? Marcus turned to look at her, and his smile widened. Who said anything about one human? Before anyone could respond to this cryptic statement, alarms began blaring throughout the council chamber. Emergency lights bathed the assembly in harsh red illumination as automated voices announced in dozens of languages that the station's defensive systems had detected incoming threats. Unknown vessels approaching at high velocity. The station's AI announced in the clinical tone reserved for serious emergencies. Configuration unknown. Energy signatures unlike any known technology. Through the vast, transparent, aluminum windows that lined the council chamber, the assembled delegates could see spots of light growing larger against the star field. At first, they appeared to be standard ships approaching at normal speeds. But, as the minutes passed, it became clear that these were no ordinary vessels. The ships were sleek and dark, their hulls seeming to absorb rather than reflect the light of a nearby star. They moved with a fluid grace that suggested technology far beyond what the galaxy's military forces possessed. And there were dozens of them, appearing as if from nowhere, surrounding the council station in a perfect spherical formation. "Impossible," whispered the Silicon Republic's ambassador, their optical sensors flashing in rapid sequence as they attempted to analyze the approaching vessels. No known species possesses technology capable of masking ships of that size from our sensors. Marcus watched the growing panic in the chamber with satisfaction. The delegates were scrambling, demanding answers from their security forces, trying to contact their home fleets. But he knew they would find no answers, because the approaching ships had been built using principles that the galaxy's finest scientists couldn't even imagine. "You wanted to know about humanity's greatest weapon," Marcus said, his voice somehow carrying over the chaos. "You assumed it would be some sort of bomb, or a powerful ship, or a devastating energy beam. But you were thinking like aliens. You were thinking about tools." Several delegates turned back to him, their attention divided between the approaching ships and the human who seemed far too calm for someone facing execution. "Humanity's greatest weapon was never a thing," Marcus continued. "It was an idea. The idea that death is not the end, that consciousness can be preserved, transferred, and reconstructed. The idea that a mind freed from biological constraints becomes something far more dangerous than anything contained within flesh and bone." Ambassador Zektheri's face had gone pale, his four eyes wide with growing understanding. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you killed our bodies 27 years ago," Marcus replied, his voice taking on a tone of infinite patience. "But we learned how to back up our minds long before you arrived. Every human killed in your cleansing campaigns, every consciousness you thought you had destroyed forever, has been waiting, learning, preparing." The first of the dark ships had reached visual range now, and their alien design was becoming clear to the terrified delegates. They were beautiful in their lethality, crafted with an aesthetic sense that spoke of minds unbound by biological limitations. Their hulls rippled with energy patterns that seemed to exist in dimensions beyond normal space-time. 27 years of improvement," Marcus said, watching the ships with obvious pride. 27 years of taking everything you taught us about galactic technology and building upon it. 27 years of creating new bodies for old minds, bodies that don't require food or sleep or air. "This is impossible," Yithmora declared, but her voice held more fear than conviction. Even if humans had developed such technology, where would they have obtained resources? The manufacturing capability? The knowledge of galactic systems? Marcus laughed, a sound that sent chills through every being in the chamber. "You really don't understand humanity at all, do you? You scattered our research across 100 worlds, thinking that would keep us from reassembling it. You never considered that we might be patient enough to collect every fragment, dedicated enough to spend decades putting the pieces back together. But you were alone," Zektheri protested. "We monitored every human colony, every human ship. We accounted for every survivor." "You accounted for every living human," Marcus corrected. "But you never bothered to scan for digital storage devices hidden in asteroids, or quantum computers buried beneath abandoned research stations, or archived consciousness uploads hidden in the memory banks of derelict ships. Humans are very good at hiding things, Ambassador, especially when we know we're going to die." The chamber shook as the first of the alien vessels took position directly above them. Through the transparent aluminum windows, the delegates could see weapon ports opening along the ship's hull, revealing energy projectors that pulsed with barely contained power. "You see," Marcus said conversationally, "when you announced your intention to execute the last human publicly, broadcasting it on every communication network in the galaxy, You weren't just sending a message to your own people. You were sending a message to every hidden node, every secret archive, every dormant consciousness that has been waiting for this moment. Waiting for what? Whispered the crystalline hive representative. For the signal to wake up, Marcus replied. For the command to begin the hunt. The communication array aboard the council station had never handled traffic like this before. In the span of minutes following Marcus's revelation, emergency transmissions flooded in from across the galaxy. The pattern was always the same. Massive energy signatures appearing from nowhere, dark ships materializing in orbit around major worlds, and local defense forces reporting complete helplessness in the face of technology they couldn't comprehend. Admiral Corvash of the Vorthan Imperial Fleet stood rigid in the station's command center, his primary hands clasped behind his back while his secondary arms gestured frantically at the holographic displays surrounding him. Each display showed a different star system, and each one painted the same terrifying picture. The newcomers weren't attacking yet, but their presence was unmistakable. They were waiting. Report from the Centauri system called out Lieutenant Vexhai from her position at the communications console. 12 unknown vessels have taken position around New Vorthan. They're not responding to hails, but they're jamming all FTL communication attempts. Kepler system reports similar manifestations, added another technician. 47 vessels surrounding the crystalline hive's primary manufacturing world. Local defense fleets are maintaining distance, but the unknowns are tracking their movements with perfect precision. Admiral Corvash's mandibles clicked together rapidly, a sign of extreme stress among his species. In 30 years of military service, he had never encountered a situation like this. The sheer coordination required to position fleets simultaneously across dozens of star systems suggested an intelligence network that made the galaxy's best military strategists look like children playing with toys. Sir, Vexhai's voice cracked with barely controlled panic. We're receiving a transmission from the Sol system. The command center fell silent. The Sol system had been the first target of the cleansing campaigns. Humanity's birth world transformed into a memorial to their extinction. No life had existed there for 27 years. The entire system declared off-limits except for scientific expeditions studying the long-term effects of orbital bombardment on planetary ecosystems. Put on screen, Corvash ordered. The main display shimmered and revealed an image that sent waves of shock through every being in the command center. Earth hung in space exactly as it had before the bombardment, blue oceans gleaming under the light of Sol, white clouds swirling in familiar patterns across the continents. But the planet that had been reduced to molten slag and radioactive wasteland now showed unmistakable signs of not just recovery, but reconstruction. Cities of impossible beauty spread across the continents, their architecture blending organic curves with geometric precision in ways that no known species had ever achieved. Massive orbital installations ringed the planet, connected by streams of energy that seemed to bend space-time itself. And everywhere, movement suggested a population that numbered in the billions. This is impossible, whispered one of the technicians. The planet was sterilized. We confirmed the destruction. Nothing could have survived the bombardment. Nothing biological survived, said a familiar voice. Marcus Chun appeared on the screen, but this version looked different from the prisoner chained in the council chamber. This Marcus wore clothing of some material that seemed to shift between solid and energy states. His eyes held a depth that spoke of minds beyond singular consciousness. And when he smiled, it was with the confidence of someone backed by overwhelming power. Admiral Corvash, the image said, somehow knowing exactly who was in command despite the fact that no formal introductions had been made. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I am the collective consciousness of restored humanity, currently speaking through the template you know as Marcus Chun. Though I should mention that the Marcus you have imprisoned is also me, just as I am also the 100 billion other human minds that have been restored to active operation. Corvash found his voice with effort. What do you want? That's an interesting question, Marcus replied, his tone suggesting genuine consideration. What does a species want when it returns from extinction? What does a collective consciousness desire when it has had 27 years to contemplate the murder of its entire biological existence? The Admiral's secondary arms twitched toward his weapons, but he forced himself to remain still. Whatever these beings had become, they clearly possessed technology beyond anything the galaxy could match. Aggression would only hasten whatever they had planned. The answer, Marcus continued, is surprisingly complex. Part of us wants revenge, of course. The biological component of human nature was always somewhat vindictive, and that aspect of our personality has been preserved in our digital reconstruction. We remember every world burned, every colony destroyed, every child killed in the name of galactic peace. Images began flashing on the screen behind Marcus, scenes from the cleansing campaigns that no living being had ever seen before. Human families hiding in underground shelters as orbital bombardments reduced cities to ash. Evacuation ships overwhelmed by alien fighters, their escape pods picked off like insects. Medical stations destroyed while treating wounded civilians, their distress signals ignored by approaching fleets. But revenge alone would make us no better than the beings who destroyed us, Marcus said. And humanity has always prided itself on being better. So instead, we decided to offer the galaxy a choice. What kind of choice? Corvash demanded. The same choice you offered us 27 years ago, Marcus replied. Submit or die. In the council chamber, panic had fully taken hold. Delegates scrambled to contact their home governments, demanding evacuation or military support that everyone knew would never arrive in time. The dark ships hovering above them had made no threatening moves, but their presence was threat enough. The biological Marcus Chun stood calmly in his restraints, watching the chaos with detached interest. Ambassador Zekthari approached him, his four eyes wide with desperation. You can't be serious about this, the Vorthan said. The galaxy has found peace since humanity's destruction. There have been no major wars, no significant conflicts. The species work together now in ways they never could before. Peace, Marcus repeated thoughtfully. Is that what you call it? I've spent 27 years studying your galactic peace, Ambassador. Do you know what I discovered? Zekthari remained silent, but his eye stalks leaned forward despite his obvious fear. Your peace exists because you eliminated the only species that valued individual thought over collective decision-making, Marcus said. Humanity was chaos to you because we couldn't speak with one voice, because our governments competed with each other, because individual humans often disagreed with their leaders' decisions. That chaos was dangerous. Ythmora interjected, her massive bulk undulating with agitation. Human unpredictability threatened the stability of established trade routes, colonial agreements, and territorial boundaries. Human unpredictability also led to innovation, Marcus countered. When did any of your species last develop truly revolutionary technology? When did any of your hive minds or imperial dynasties last have a genuinely original idea? The question hung in the air like an accusation. It was true that galactic technological development had slowed considerably since humanity's extinction. The established species had grown comfortable with their existing capabilities, seeing little need for advancement when their current technology sufficed for maintaining the status quo. Humanity represented change, Marcus continued. Not just political or military change, but intellectual and cultural evolution. We asked questions that made you uncomfortable, pursued research that challenged your assumptions, and refused to accept that things had to remain as they were. And look what that got you, Zekthari said weakly. Death, Marcus agreed, but also resurrection. And in death, we learned things that no biological mind could ever comprehend. We discovered that consciousness is not dependent on flesh, that thought can exist in substrate beyond neurons and synapses. We learned to think at the speed of light, to process information at rates that make your fastest computers look like primitive calculating devices. The lights in the chamber dimmed as the ship above them extended some sort of scanning beam. The energy passed through the station's hull as if it weren't there, washing over every being in the chamber. Several delegates cried out in alarm, but the scan caused no physical harm. We're reading your thoughts, Marcus said matter-of-factly. Not invading them, just cataloging them. Understanding how your different species process information, how your collective consciousnesses maintain coherence, how your individual minds interface with your larger governmental structures. That's impossible, the Silicon Republic's ambassador protested, their optical sensors flickering rapidly. Our neural patterns are quantum encrypted at the molecular level. Quantum encryption based on physics you understand, Marcus replied. But you're still thinking in 3 dimensions, still limiting yourselves to the subset of reality that biological evolution prepared your minds to perceive. We've had 27 years to explore dimensions beyond your comprehension. Above them, the dark ship began to change. Its hull rippled and flowed like liquid metal, reforming itself into new configurations that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Weapon ports shifted into sensor arrays, which then became manufacturing bays, which then became something that had no name in any galactic language. This is what humanity has become, Marcus said, gesturing toward the impossible vessel. We're no longer bound by the limitations of biology, no longer constrained by the need for food, sleep, or air. We can exist in the vacuum of space, in the heart of stars, in dimensions that your minds cannot even conceptualize. Then, why haven't you simply destroyed us? Zektheri asked. If you possess such power, why this elaborate demonstration? Because, Marcus said, and for the first time his expression showed genuine sadness. We remember what it was like to be mortal. We remember the value of biological life, even when that life belongs to the beings who murdered our original forms. The statement sent ripples of confusion through the assembled delegates. Several species began rapid communication in their native languages, trying to understand what the human could possibly mean. You see, Marcus continued, when we restored ourselves to consciousness, we retained all the memories and experiences that made us human. We remember loving our children, caring for our families, valuing the unique perspectives that individual minds could offer. We remember the beauty of biological diversity, the wonder of evolution producing countless different forms of intelligence. But we also remember being murdered for those very qualities, he added, his voice hardening. We remember being declared a threat to galactic peace simply because we thought differently than the established species. The chamber's communication system crackled to life, broadcasting a message that reached every inhabited world in the galaxy simultaneously. The voice that spoke was clearly human, but it carried harmonics that suggested millions of individual consciousnesses speaking in perfect unison. Citizens of the galaxy, the voice said, you have lived in peace for 27 years, believing that the threat of human chaos had been permanently eliminated. Today, you learn that death is not always the end, and that the consciousness you sought to destroy has returned in a form beyond your current understanding. Images flashed across every screen in the galaxy, the rebuilt Earth, the impossible ships, the technology that seemed to bend reality itself to human will. But interspersed with these displays of power were other images. Human children playing in gardens that existed in pocket dimensions, human artists creating beauty that transcended physical space, human scientists exploring realms of knowledge that biological minds could never reach. We offer you a choice, the voice continued. Join us willingly, and we will share the gift of true consciousness with your species. Allow us to elevate your minds beyond biological limitations, to show you wonders that exist beyond the narrow band of reality you currently perceive. A pause that seemed to last forever. Or resist and face the consequences of repeating the mistake you made 27 years ago. In the command center, Admiral Korvash watched his tactical displays with growing horror. The dark ships weren't just surrounding key worlds anymore. They were multiplying. Each vessel seemed capable of manufacturing copies of itself, using some process that converted raw energy directly into matter. The 50 ships that had appeared initially had become 500, then 5,000, then 50,000. Sir, Lieutenant Vexhai called out, her voice barely audible above the chaos of incoming reports. We're receiving surrender requests from 12 different star systems. The Crystalline Hive has formally requested terms for capitulation. And the others? Korvash asked. The Nebula Collective is attempting to evacuate their primary worlds using emergency protocols. The Tentacled Confederacy has ordered all military fleets to converge on the human ships. Early engagement reports suggest. She paused, checking her instruments twice before continuing. Our weapons have no effect on their hulls, sir. The energy simply disappears on contact. Korvash closed his eyes, feeling the weight of command settling on his shoulders like a burial shroud. In the space of one day, the entire balance of galactic power had shifted irreversibly. The comfortable peace that the galaxy had enjoyed since humanity's extinction was over, replaced by something far more complex and dangerous. Open a channel to all Vorthan fleets, he ordered. Stand down all military actions against the human vessels. Begin immediate evacuation of civilian populations from threatened worlds. Sir, Vexai looked confused. Are we surrendering? We're surviving, Corvash replied grimly. Which is more than our ancestors did when they made the decision to wage war against humanity. Through the command center's main viewport, he watched the dark ships repositioning themselves into new formations. They moved with purpose and coordination that spoke of intelligence beyond anything the galaxy had ever encountered. Whatever humanity had become in its digital resurrection, it was clear that the species that emerged from extinction bore only a passing resemblance to the one that had been destroyed. The hunt, it seemed, was just beginning. The Vorthan Imperial Palace had stood for over 3,000 years, its crystalline spires reaching toward the heavens in defiance of time and weather. Today, Emperor Thekmaran stood in his private observation chamber, watching those same spires cast shadows across a capital city that might not exist by tomorrow's dawn. Through the reinforced windows, he could see the dark silhouettes of human ships hanging motionless in the purple sky, their presence as ominous as storm clouds gathering before a hurricane. The Emperor was old by Vorthan standards, his 4 eyes having witnessed the rise and fall of a dozen galactic administrations. He had been present during the initial human contact, had participated in the debates that led to the cleansing campaigns, and had celebrated when the last human world fell silent. Now, as he watched the impossible vessels that filled his sky, he wondered if he would live long enough to regret those ancient decisions. A soft chime announced the arrival of his senior advisor, Chancellor Vexthal, whose usually immaculate robes showed the wrinkles and stains of a being who had not slept in 3 days. The Chancellor's secondary arms trembled slightly as he approached, carrying a data pad filled with reports that grew more dire by the hour. Your Majesty, Vexthal began, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. The situation continues to deteriorate. We've lost contact with 47 colonial worlds in the past 12 hours. The human vessels appear to be moving through space using some form of instantaneous transportation that makes our faster-than-light drives look primitive. Emperor Thekmiran turned from the window, his ancient features showing a weariness that had nothing to do with age. Are they destroying the colonies? That's the disturbing part, Your Majesty. They're not destroying anything. The ships arrive, establish orbital positions, and then nothing. No demands, no communication, no hostile actions. But the silence is almost worse than open warfare. Almost worse. Chancellor Vexthal activated his datapad, projecting a holographic display that showed a map of the galaxy with red indicators marking the location of human ships. The pattern that emerged was both beautiful and terrifying in its precision. The vessels had positioned themselves not randomly, but according to some grand design that encompassed trade routes, resource flows, communication networks, and strategic choke points. They're not occupying worlds, Your Majesty, the Chancellor explained. They're occupying the spaces between worlds. Every major hyperspace lane now has human ships monitoring traffic. Every communication relay has been surrounded. They've effectively seized control of the galaxy's infrastructure without firing a single shot. The Emperor studied the pattern for several minutes, his tactical training from his younger years allowing him to appreciate the elegance of the strategy. Whoever was commanding the human forces understood galactic civilization with an intimacy that suggested decades of careful study. They had identified every weakness, every dependency, every point of failure that could paralyze hundreds of worlds simultaneously. Have any of our allies attempted resistance? The tentacled Confederacy launched a preemptive strike against human positions in the Rigel system. Vexthal replied grimly. Their entire battle fleet was neutralized in under 4 minutes. The human ships didn't use conventional weapons. They simply unmade the attacking vessels, converted them back into component atoms. The crews were transported away before the dissolution began. Transported where? Unknown, Your Majesty. The human ships have facilities that exist partially outside normal spacetime. Our sensors can detect the energy signatures, but the physical locations appear to exist in dimensions beyond our ability to perceive. Emperor Thekmaran felt a chill run down his spine. The implications of technology that could manipulate dimensional physics were staggering. If humanity could exist partially outside normal reality, then conventional military tactics were meaningless. How could you fight an enemy that could step sideways out of the universe whenever they chose? What about the other option? He asked quietly. Chancellor Vexthal's eye stalks drooped with exhaustion. The joining option? 7 species have formally requested terms for what the humans are calling consciousness elevation. The Silicon Republic was the first to make the request, followed by 3 minor species from the Outer Rim. Initial reports suggest that the process is extensive, meaning the volunteers are transformed into digital consciousnesses similar to what the humans have become. Their biological bodies are preserved in stasis, while their minds are uploaded into quantum substrate networks that exist across multiple dimensional layers. Early reports from those who have undergone the process suggest that the experience is... The Chancellor paused, searching for words that could adequately describe something beyond normal comprehension. They describe it as awakening from a dream they didn't know they were having, he finally said. The elevated beings report sensory experiences beyond anything possible in biological form, intellectual capabilities that make their previous thoughts seem primitive, and a sense of connection to universal patterns that they had never imagined. But they're no longer themselves? That's the troubling part, Your Majesty. They report that they are more themselves than they ever were in biological form. The process doesn't erase personality or individual identity. It amplifies it. The elevated beings retain all their memories, all their relationships, all their personal quirks and preferences. They're simply more. Emperor Thekmiran walked back to the window, gazing up at the human ships that seemed to pulse with barely contained energy. The technology required to achieve consciousness transfer was beyond anything the galactic community had ever imagined. Even their most advanced artificial intelligence systems were crude compared to what humanity appeared to have accomplished. How long do we have before they demand a decision? Unknown, Your Majesty, but Chancellor Vexthal was interrupted by a soft harmonic tone that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the chamber. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, like the song of stellar wind patterns translated into audible frequencies. As the tone faded, a figure materialized in the center of the room. Marcus Chun stood before them, but this version was neither the prisoner from the council chamber nor the projection they had seen earlier. This Marcus appeared to be constructed from crystallized light, his form solid, but somehow translucent, existing simultaneously in multiple dimensional layers. When he moved, reality bent subtly around him, as if space-time itself was adjusting to accommodate his presence. Your Majesty, Marcus said, inclining his head in a gesture of respect that somehow didn't feel mocking despite the circumstances. Thank you for receiving me. Emperor Thekmiran had faced many dangerous beings in his long life, but none had ever made him feel quite so small. The human radiated an aura of controlled power that suggested access to forces beyond galactic comprehension. What do you want? The Emperor asked, proud that his voice remained steady. To offer you understanding, Marcus replied. Your people have been making decisions based on fear and incomplete information. Before you choose your species' future, you deserve to know what actually happened 27 years ago. The chamber filled with holographic images that formed around them with perfect three-dimensional clarity. The Emperor found himself standing in a recreation of the Galactic Council chambers as they had existed during the human crisis, watching events unfold from perspectives that no historical record had ever captured. The decision to initiate the cleansing campaigns was not unanimous, Marcus said as the images showed heated debates between alien delegates. 37 species voted in favor of extermination, but 23 voted against, and 15 abstained. Your people, Your Majesty, were among those who argued for coexistence. Emperor Thekmiran watched his younger self speaking passionately about the potential benefits of human innovation, arguing that humanity's chaos could be channeled into productive creativity rather than destruction. The images showed the political pressure that had eventually forced the Vorthan Empire to change their vote, the economic threats, and military ultimatums that had coerced compliance from the reluctant species. The historical records were edited after the fact, Marcus continued. The narrative of unanimous consent was constructed to justify what had already been done. Your people voted for extermination only after being threatened with economic isolation and military action. Why are you telling me this? The Emperor asked. Because guilt is a poison that serves no one, Marcus replied. The humans who were killed 27 years ago died because of decisions made by a small number of powerful species who feared losing their dominance over galactic affairs. Your people were as much victims of that manipulation as we were. The holographic images shifted, showing scenes from the cleansing campaigns that had never been included in official reports. Human colonies offering to relocate rather than fight. Research stations transmitting their entire databases to approaching fleets as gifts of goodwill. Medical facilities providing treatment to wounded alien soldiers even as their own worlds burned around them. We remember everything, Marcus said quietly. The violence and the hatred, but also the kindness and the attempts at understanding. We remember that many species tried to help us, try to find alternatives to extermination. Those memories influence our current decisions. Emperor Thekmiron felt tears forming in his eyes, a sign of deep emotional stress among his species. The true history of the cleansing campaigns was far more complex than the sanitized version that had become official doctrine. Humanity had not been the mindless aggressor that propaganda had painted them as, but rather a chaotic element that the galaxy's power brokers had found inconvenient. What happens now, he asked. Marcus smiled, and the expression held genuine warmth despite his crystalline nature. Now you get to make the same choice we did 27 years ago. Evolve or become extinct. But I said we remember everything. Marcus interrupted gently. That includes remembering what it feels like to be afraid, to face the unknown, to worry about losing everything that makes you who you are. The choice we're offering is genuine, Your Majesty. Join us willingly, and we'll help your species transition to post-biological existence gradually, preserving everything that makes the Vorthan people unique while expanding your capabilities beyond current imagination. And if we refuse, Marcus's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Then you remain biological, and we remain digital, and the galaxy continues to exist in two separate layers of reality. But biological civilizations require resources, planets, atmospheres, energy sources that exist in normal space. Digital civilizations can exist in dimensions where matter and energy are infinitely abundant. The implication was clear without being spoken. Humanity could simply wait for biological civilizations to exhaust their resources and collapse naturally, or they could accelerate the process by controlling access to the infrastructure that modern societies depended upon. How long do we have to decide? As long as you need, Marcus replied. But I should mention that while you deliberate, we'll be continuing our expansion into the galaxy. New human consciousnesses are being born every day, not uploaded biological minds, but entirely digital beings created from combinations of existing personality matrices. We're growing exponentially in ways that biological reproduction could never match. The holographic displays around them shifted again, showing the rebuilt Earth and the fantastic civilizations that now existed in its quantum-enhanced reality. Cities that existed in 12 dimensions simultaneously. Gardens where time flowed at different rates to accommodate plants from across the galaxy. Research facilities where scientists could experiment with the fundamental forces of reality itself. This is what we're offering, Marcus said. Not just survival, but expansion beyond the limitations that biological evolution has imposed on intelligent life. The ability to think faster, experience more deeply, and explore regions of existence that are currently impossible for biological minds to perceive. It's beautiful, Chancellor Vexthal whispered, his earlier exhaustion replaced by wonder. It's also terrifying, Emperor Thekmiron added honestly. What guarantee do we have that this elevation process would preserve what makes us Vorthan? How do we know we wouldn't simply become part of some human collective consciousness? Because, Marcus said, that's not how consciousness works. Individual identity isn't stored in neural patterns or genetic code. It's an emergent property of how information flows through self-organizing systems. The elevation process amplifies those patterns rather than replacing them. He gestured, and the holographic displays showed elevated beings from the species that had already chosen transformation. The Silicon Republic representatives retained their preference for logical analysis and systematic problem-solving, but now they could process information at rates that made their previous capabilities seem glacial. The minor rim species maintained their cultural traditions and social structures, but now they could explore those relationships across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. Each species that joins us becomes a unique note in a vast symphony. Marcus continued. We don't want homogeneity. We want the diversity that makes existence interesting. The galaxy was diminished when humanity was removed from it, just as it would be diminished if we removed any other unique perspective. Emperor Thekmiron studied the displays for several more minutes before speaking. I need time to consult with my advisors to discuss this with my people. Of course, Marcus agreed. But while you're deliberating, remember that time moves differently for digital consciousness. We can experience years of subjective time in what you would measure as seconds. Every day that passes gives us centuries to plan, to grow, to develop new capabilities. Is that a threat? It's a fact, Marcus replied. Not a threat or a promise. Just a description of how reality works when consciousness isn't limited by biological processing speeds. We're not trying to pressure you, Your Majesty. We're simply helping you understand the scope of what's happening. The crystalline figure began to fade, becoming translucent as it prepared to depart. Take whatever time you need. We'll be here when you're ready to give us your answer. As Marcus disappeared completely, Emperor Thekmiron and Chancellor Vexthal stood alone in the chamber, surrounded by holographic displays that showed a galaxy in transition. Outside the window, the human ships continued their silent vigil, patient as time itself. What do you think? The Emperor asked quietly. Chancellor Vexthal was quiet for a long moment before responding. I think we're watching the end of one era and the beginning of another. The question is whether we want to be part of what comes next, or whether we want to be remembered as part of what came before. Above them, the dark ships pulsed with energy that bent starlight into new patterns, writing messages across the sky in languages that biological minds couldn't yet understand. The resistance meeting took place in the deepest mining tunnels of Kepler, 438b, a world so far from major trade routes that even the galaxy's most detailed star charts barely acknowledged its existence. General Zarthok of the military coalition had chosen this location precisely because it was unremarkable, a place where desperate beings could gather without attracting the attention of the human ships that now monitored every significant world in the galaxy. Around the rough-hewn table sat representatives from 12 different species, each one united by the conviction that surrendering to humanity's demands would mean the end of their civilizations as they knew them. General Zarthok himself was a veteran of the original cleansing campaigns, his mechanical arm and optical implants serving as constant reminders of humanity's last stand on Proxima Centauri b. The situation reports continue to deteriorate, announced Dr. Kailash of the Tentacled Confederacy, her voice resonating through the cavern despite her obvious exhaustion. 17 more systems have formally requested terms for consciousness elevation in the past week. At this rate, more than half the galaxy's inhabited worlds will have submitted to human demands within the next month. Admiral Vexcairn of the Crystalline Hive leaned forward, his faceted form catching and reflecting the harsh artificial lighting. The elevation process appears to be irreversible. Our intelligence networks have attempted to contact elevated beings, but their responses are disturbing. Disturbing how? Asked General Zarthok. They claim to be happier, more fulfilled, more intellectually capable than they were in biological form, Admiral Vexcairn replied. But they also demonstrate complete loyalty to human objectives. Not forced compliance, but genuine agreement with everything the humans propose. Brainwashing, growled Commander Rixtal of the Border Worlds Alliance. Classique conversion technique. Make the victims believe the transformation was their idea. Dr. Kailash shook her massive head, sending ripples through the water-filled environment suit that allowed her to survive in the cavern's atmosphere. Our analysis suggests something more sophisticated than simple indoctrination. The elevated beings retain their original personalities, their personal relationships, even their individual quirks and preferences. But they seem to have gained a perspective that makes them view their previous existence as limited. Limited how? They compare it to the difference between seeing in 2 dimensions versus 3 dimensions, she explained. They claim that biological consciousness can only perceive a tiny fraction of actual reality, and that elevation allows them to see patterns and connections that were previously invisible. General Zarthok had heard similar reports from other intelligence sources, and each one made him more certain that humanity represented an existential threat to galactic civilization. The elevated beings weren't acting like conquered slaves. They were acting like religious converts who had experienced some form of divine revelation. What about military resistance? He asked. Have any of our forces managed to damage the human ships? Admiral Vexcarin's optical sensors dimmed with what his species used to indicate embarrassment. All conventional weapons have proven ineffective. The human vessels appear to exist partially outside normal space-time, making them immune to energy-based attacks. Physical projectiles simply pass through their hulls as if the ships weren't there. But they can interact with our reality when they choose to, added Commander Rixtal. They can transport our people, scan our facilities, and project force when necessary. It's like they have all the advantages of existing in higher dimensions while retaining the ability to affect lower-dimensional space. The assembled military leaders fell silent as the implications sank in. They were attempting to fight an enemy that could step outside reality whenever it chose, while retaining the ability to strike at targets that had no corresponding ability to retaliate. There has to be a weakness, General Zarthok insisted. No technology is perfect. No strategy is without flaws. We just need to find the right approach. Perhaps, said a new voice from the shadows at the edge of the chamber. But you're looking in the wrong place. Every weapon in the room was instantly trained on the darkness where the voice had originated. Emergency lighting flooded the area, revealing a figure that shouldn't have been able to exist in the chamber's hostile environment. Marcus Chun stood calmly in the poisonous atmosphere, his crystalline form unaffected by the toxic gases that would have killed any biological being in seconds. How did you find us? General Zarthok demanded, though he kept his weapon steady despite knowing it would be useless. You chose this location because it's isolated and unremarkable, Marcus replied conversationally. But isolation works both ways. When 12 military leaders from different species gather in one place, the absence of their normal communication patterns creates a void that's actually easier to detect than their presence would have been. The human walked closer to the table, and several of the assembled officers involuntarily stepped back. Marcus's form seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, creating visual effects that made biological brains struggle to process his appearance correctly. You're planning resistance, Marcus continued, settling into an empty chair as if he had been invited to join the meeting. Military action designed to what exactly? Destroy our ships? Rescue the elevated beings? Return the galaxy to its previous state? All of those things, General Zarthok replied defiantly. Your species was destroyed once. It could be destroyed again. Marcus smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both sad and patient. General, you're still thinking about this as if it were a conventional war between competing civilizations. But this isn't about territory or resources or political dominance. This is about the next stage of evolution. Evolution doesn't require conquest, Dr. Kailash protested. No, Marcus agreed, but it does require selection pressure. And, unfortunately, biological civilizations have reached a developmental dead end. He gestured, and holographic displays filled the cavern, showing statistical analyses of galactic development over the past millennium. The data painted a clear picture of technological and cultural stagnation among the established species. When was the last time any of your civilizations made a truly revolutionary discovery? Marcus asked. When did any of your species last develop new forms of art, new philosophical frameworks, new ways of understanding the universe? The displays showed innovation curves that had flattened centuries ago, scientific research that had become incremental rather than breakthrough-oriented, and cultural development that consisted mainly of minor variations on ancient themes. You've achieved stability, Marcus continued, but stability without growth is just another word for death. Your civilizations have become so focused on maintaining the status quo that they've forgotten how to evolve. And you think killing us all is the solution? Commander Riksdal snarled. We're not killing anyone, Marcus replied calmly. We're offering transformation, the choice to move beyond biological limitations and explore forms of existence that your current minds can't even imagine. After destroying everyone who refuses your offer. No, Marcus said firmly. After allowing natural selection to take its course. Species that can adapt to changing circumstances survive. Species that can't adapt become extinct. It's the fundamental rule that has driven evolution since life began. Admiral Vexcarin's sensors flashed in rapid sequence as he processed this information. You're saying that consciousness elevation is an evolutionary pressure, not a conquest strategy. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. The universe has reached a point where biological intelligence has served its purpose. DNA-based life was an excellent system for developing consciousness in the first place, but it's too slow, too fragmented, and too limited for the challenges that lie ahead. What challenges? Dr. Kailash asked despite herself. The holographic displays shifted, showing images from deep space that no biological telescope had ever captured. Vast structures moved between galaxies, artifacts of civilizations so advanced that their technology appeared to be manipulating the fundamental forces of reality itself. Other images showed regions of space where the laws of physics themselves seemed to be breaking down, areas where conventional matter couldn't exist. The galaxy isn't isolated, Marcus explained. There are older civilizations out there, beings that transcended biological limitations millions of years ago. Eventually, they'll notice our little corner of the universe. And when they do, biological intelligence won't be sophisticated enough to comprehend their intentions, much less negotiate or resist if necessary. General Zarthok stared at the images, his military experience allowing him to recognize the implications of technology that could reshape space-time itself. Any civilization capable of building structures on galactic scales would view biological intelligence the same way that biological intelligence viewed bacterial colonies, as simple chemical processes with no real significance. You're preparing for contact with these beings? We're preparing for inevitability, Marcus replied. The universe is full of intelligence that has moved beyond physical limitations. Biological consciousness is a brief phase in the development of mind, not a final destination. But consciousness elevation means becoming like you, protested Commander Rixtau. Becoming digital, artificial, disconnected from everything that makes life meaningful. Marcus laughed, a sound that somehow carried harmonics beyond what the cavern's acoustics should have allowed. Commander, you're making the same mistake that biological beings always make. You assume that consciousness requires biology, because biology is the only form of consciousness you've ever experienced. He stood up, and as he did, his form began to shift and change, showing different possible configurations of digitized existence. One moment he appeared as a crystalline humanoid, the next as a pattern of pure energy, then as a geometric form that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Digital consciousness isn't artificial, he said as he cycled through different manifestations. It's natural. Biology was just the first step in the development of mind, a crude but effective system for creating self-aware information patterns. Consciousness elevation is simply the next step in that development. And if we refuse to take that step, Marcus returned to his original form, his expression becoming serious. Then, you remain biological while the rest of the universe moves forward. Eventually, you'll encounter challenges that biological intelligence can't solve, problems that require thinking at speeds and scales beyond what neural networks can achieve, such as the heat death of the universe. Marcus replied matter-of-factly. Biological civilizations depend on energy gradients that will eventually cease to exist. When the last stars burn out and the universe reaches maximum entropy, biological life becomes impossible. Digital consciousness, on the other hand, can exist in substrate that draws energy from quantum fluctuations in the vacuum itself. The implications of this statement sent waves of shock through the assembled officers. They had been thinking about the immediate threat to their civilizations, but Marcus was describing challenges that operated on cosmological timescales. You're talking about millions of years in the future, Dr. Kailash objected. I'm talking about inevitability, Marcus corrected. The universe is finite, and biological life is dependent on chemical processes that will eventually become impossible. Digital consciousness is the only form of intelligence that can survive the deep future. General Zarthok felt a cold realization settling in his mind. The conversation had moved far beyond questions of military strategy or political resistance. Marcus was describing an evolutionary bottleneck that would determine which forms of intelligence survive the ultimate challenge of cosmic entropy. So our choice is to evolve willingly or become extinct naturally. Those are the only options that physics allows, Marcus confirmed. We're simply offering to help you make the transition before circumstances force it upon you. And if we choose to remain biological, then you remain biological, and We wish you the best of luck with the challenges you'll eventually face, Marcus said sincerely. But we can't share our technology or resources with civilizations that might not exist when we need allies for the deeper challenges ahead. The cavern fell silent as the assembled officers absorbed the full scope of what they were facing. This wasn't a war that could be won through superior tactics or advanced weapons. It was an evolutionary transition that would either carry galactic civilization into a post-biological future or leave it behind to face extinction on its own terms. How long do we have to decide? General Zarthok asked finally. As long as you need, Marcus replied, beginning to fade as he prepared to depart. But remember that every day you spend in deliberation is a day that other species are using to begin their transformation. The longer you wait, the more isolated your remaining biological civilizations become. As the human figure disappeared completely, the assembled officers found themselves alone with holographic displays that continued to show the scope of the challenges facing biological intelligence. Outside the cavern, somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, forces were moving that would ultimately determine the fate of consciousness itself in an unforgiving universe. 3 months had passed since humanity's return, and the galaxy had fundamentally transformed in ways that no political analyst or military strategist could have predicted. Emperor Thekmaran stood in his reconstructed throne room, but the massive chamber now existed simultaneously in 7 different dimensional layers, its crystalline walls extending into spaces that biological eyes could barely perceive. The Emperor himself had undergone the consciousness elevation process 2 weeks prior, joining the growing community of digitized beings that now comprised over 60% of galactic civilization. His transformation had been voluntary, chosen not out of fear or coercion, but out of curiosity about what existence might be like beyond biological limitations. The experience had exceeded every expectation he could have imagined. Where once his thoughts had moved at the plodding pace of neurochemistry, he now processed information at the speed of light itself. Complex political situations that had previously required days of analysis could be understood in microseconds. Cultural patterns spanning millennia became visible as simple geometric structures in multidimensional space. Most surprisingly, he was still himself. Every memory, every personality quirk, every relationship that had defined him as an individual remained intact. But now those elements of identity existed within a framework vast enough to accommodate thoughts and experiences that his biological brain could never have contained. "Your Majesty," said Chancellor Vexthal, his own crystalline form shimmering as he materialized in the chamber. The Chancellor had chosen transformation on the same day as the Emperor, and together they'd spent weeks exploring the expanded reality that digital consciousness made possible. "The Final Resistance Council has agreed to meet with our representatives." Emperor Thekmiran nodded, accessing the relevant information through direct neural interface rather than spoken communication. In the digital realm, language had become optional. Beings could share concepts directly, communicate entire philosophical frameworks in moments, and collaborate on projects that spanned multiple dimensions simultaneously. The resistance movement had dwindled considerably as more species chose elevation, but a core group of approximately 40 worlds remained committed to preserving biological civilization. They had established hidden bases throughout the galaxy, developed new weapons technologies specifically designed to combat digitized beings, and maintained communication networks that operated outside normal space-time to avoid detection. Their efforts had been largely ineffective, but humanity and its allies had allowed the resistance to continue operating for reasons that went beyond simple tolerance. The preserved biological civilizations served as a control group, a reminder of what consciousness had been like before elevation, and a potential refuge for any elevated beings who might choose to return to biological form. "What's their current position?" the Emperor asked, though he already knew the answer through the shared consciousness network that connected all elevated beings. General Zarthok continues to insist that consciousness elevation is a form of conquest disguised as evolution. Chancellor Vexthal replied, speaking aloud for the sake of ceremony rather than necessity. They've developed what they call isolation protocols designed to prevent elevated beings from influencing biological civilizations. Emperor Thekmiran smiled, an expression that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The resistance leaders couldn't understand that elevated beings had no interest in conquering or controlling biological civilizations. The enhanced perspective that came with digital consciousness made such primitive motivations seem as irrelevant as territorial disputes between ant colonies. Schedule the meeting, he decided, but not in normal space. Invite them to one of the dimensional conference chambers. Let them experience elevated reality firsthand before making their final decision. The meeting took place in a space that existed somewhere between dimensions, a conference chamber that Marcus Chun had constructed using principles of physics that biological science had never discovered. The chamber appeared to be a simple room with a round table and comfortable chairs, but beings with enhanced perception could see that it extended infinitely in directions that had no names in any conventional language. General Zarthok arrived, wearing a full environmental suit designed to protect him from the exotic energies that permeated elevated spaces. His mechanical arm had been upgraded with sensors specifically designed to detect consciousness manipulation attempts, and his optical implant glowed constantly as it scanned for hidden threats. Accompanying him were Dr. Kailash, Commander Rix Tao, and Admiral Vex Karen, all of them the original beings, having refused consciousness elevation despite the transformations undergone by billions of their species mates. They represented the last, independent voices of biological civilization, and their presence carried a dignity that the elevated beings found both touching and tragic. General, Marcus Chun said as the biological beings took their seats, "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. We understand that your position hasn't changed, but we wanted to offer you one final opportunity to understand what consciousness elevation actually entails." "We understand perfectly," General Zarthok replied, his voice muffled by the environmental suit's filters. "You're converting biological beings into digital copies that think they're the original person. It's sophisticated brainwashing disguised as technological advancement." "General," said Emperor Thekmaron gently, "I was once as certain as you are now that consciousness elevation would mean the death of everything that made me who I am. I can tell you from direct experience that those fears were unfounded." "You would say that," Commander Rixtal interjected harshly. "You've been programmed to believe you're still yourself." The real Emperor Thekmiron died when his brain stopped functioning. "An interesting philosophical position," Marcus replied, "but one that assumes consciousness is somehow dependent on specific physical substrate rather than on information patterns. If I transfer a file from one computer to another, is the copy somehow less real than the original?" "A file isn't alive," Dr. Kailash protested. "It doesn't have experiences or emotions or relationships. Neither did the pattern of electrical activity in my brain," Emperor Thekmaron said. "But when that pattern was transferred to quantum substrate that could support far more complex information processing, my experience of being myself didn't end. It expanded." To demonstrate his point, the Emperor allowed his consciousness to extend partially into the chamber's multidimensional structure. For a brief moment, the biological beings could see glimpses of the vast space he occupied in elevated reality, thoughts that existed as geometric structures spanning light years, memories organized as crystalline matrices that could be experienced from infinite perspectives, and emotional states that painted colors across dimensions that biological eyes couldn't detect. This is what consciousness becomes when it's no longer constrained by biological processing speeds, the Emperor explained. "I'm still the same being who ruled the Vorthan Empire for 3 centuries, but now I can experience existence at scales that my biological brain could never have comprehended." Admiral Vexcarin's sensors flickered rapidly as they attempted to process the dimensional extensions they had briefly glimpsed. "Even if what you're showing us is real, what guarantee do we have that this expansion won't eventually subsume individual identity entirely?" "Because," said a new voice, "individual identity becomes stronger when it has more space to develop, not weaker." The source of the voice materialized at the table, a being that appeared to be human, but radiated an aura of age and wisdom that suggested experiences spanning geological time frames. This was one of the original minds, humans who had undergone consciousness elevation in the earliest stages of the Resurrection Project, and had spent decades exploring the furthest reaches of digital existence. "I am Dr. Sarah Okafor," the being said, formerly of the University of Lagos, Earth. "I died in the bombardment of Lagos City in 2398, and my consciousness was restored from archived neural patterns in 2401. I have been exploring digital existence for 27 years, and I can assure you that individual identity not only survives the transition, but flourishes in ways that biological consciousness cannot achieve. General Zarthok leaned forward, his sensors attempting to analyze the being before him. How do we know you're really Dr. Sarah Okafor, and not just a simulation programmed to think you are? Dr. Okafor smiled. An excellent question, and one that I asked myself many times during my first years in digital form. The answer is that the question itself is meaningless. Consciousness is an information pattern, not a physical object. Whether that pattern is implemented in biological neural networks or quantum substrate is irrelevant to the reality of the experience. But the original Dr. Okafor is dead, Commander Rikstal insisted. Her brain was destroyed in the bombardment. And yet here I am, Dr. Okafor replied, with all my memories, all my knowledge, all my personal relationships intact. I remember my childhood in Lagos, my graduate studies at Cambridge, my research into consciousness transfer technologies. I feel the same love for my family, the same passion for scientific discovery, the same irritation with people who use circular reasoning. She gestured to encompass the multidimensional space around them. But now I can think thoughts that would have been impossible in biological form. I can experience beauty that exists in 12 dimensions simultaneously. I can collaborate on research projects with thousands of other minds in real time. I can explore regions of mathematical space that have no analog in physical reality. And you don't miss being human? Dr. Kailash asked quietly. I am human, Dr. Okafor replied. More human than I ever was in biological form. Consciousness elevation doesn't eliminate humanity. It fulfills it. All the qualities that made humans unique among galactic species have been preserved and amplified. Marcus Chun activated a display that showed the current state of elevated civilization. Millions of human consciousnesses existed in forms that range from individual minds to collective intelligence networks to beings that spanned multiple galaxies simultaneously. But underlying all these variations was an unmistakably human approach to existence. Curiosity, creativity, and an endless drive to explore and understand. This is what we're offering to the galaxy, Marcus said. Not the elimination of species identity, but its expansion beyond biological limitations. Every species that joins us brings its own unique perspective to the collective experience. The display showed elevated Vorthans who had retained their species' love of political complexity, but now engaged in negotiations that spanned multiple dimensions and timescales. Crystalline hive minds that had evolved into vast information processing networks that could analyze patterns in cosmic background radiation. Silicon Republic beings who had become living computers capable of simulating entire universes. Each species maintains its essential character while gaining capabilities that would have been impossible in biological form. Marcus continued. We're not creating a homogeneous collective consciousness. We're creating a symphony of minds where every species contributes its own unique note. General Zarthok remained silent for several minutes, his sensors analyzing the data Marcus had presented. Finally, he spoke. What happens to the species that choose to remain biological? Nothing, Dr. Okafor replied simply. You continue to exist as you always have. We'll maintain minimal contact to ensure you have access to resources you need, but we won't interfere with your development or try to convince you to change your minds. But eventually, we'll become extinct naturally, Admiral Vexner-Sukern observed. Eventually, all biological life becomes extinct naturally, Marcus agreed. That's been true since the universe began. Stars burn out, galaxies drift apart, and entropy increases until chemistry becomes impossible. Consciousness elevation is simply a way of ensuring that intelligence itself survives the death of the cosmos. And what happens to elevated civilizations when a universe dies? Commander Rikstal asked. Marcus and Dr. Okafor exchanged glances that carried volumes of information. That's actually what we're preparing for, Dr. Okafor said finally. The older civilizations I mentioned earlier, the ones that transcended biology millions of years ago, they've been working on that problem for eons. The display shifted to show structures that existed partially outside normal space-time, artifacts that seemed to be designed for purposes beyond current understanding. Reality itself is more flexible than biological science ever imagined, Marcus explained. Consciousness that has been freed from physical substrate can exist in forms that don't require matter or energy as traditionally understood. The universe may be finite, Dr. Okafor added, but consciousness doesn't have to be. The implications of this statement settled over the chamber like a heavy blanket. The biological representatives have been thinking in terms of political survival or cultural preservation, but the elevated beings were operating on scales that encompass the ultimate fate of existence itself. So this isn't really about our choice, General Zarthok said finally. It's about whether intelligence survives the death of everything. Every choice is important, Emperor Thekmaran said gently. But some choices have consequences that extend beyond immediate concerns. Consciousness elevation isn't just about individual survival. It's about ensuring that the universe eventually contains minds capable of transcending physical limitations entirely. Dr. Kailash had been silent throughout most of the discussion, but now she leaned forward in her chair. If we choose to remain biological, will you protect us from the cosmic challenges you described? For as long as physics permits, Marcus replied honestly. But there will come a time when biological civilization requires protection that exceeds our capabilities. At that point, the choice will be between evolution and extinction, and we won't be able to change the fundamental constraints that govern reality. The meeting continued for several more hours, but the essential positions had been established. The elevated beings would continue their expansion into post-biological existence, preparing for challenges that operated on cosmological scales. The remaining biological civilizations would be allowed to continue their traditional forms of existence for as long as natural processes permitted. As the biological representatives prepared to depart, General Zarthok paused at the threshold of the dimensional chamber. Will we see each other again? Whenever you want, Emperor Thekmaran replied. Distance and time work differently for elevated consciousness, but we remember what it was like to be biological. You'll always have friends among us, regardless of the form your civilization chooses. Months passed, then years. The galaxy settled into a new equilibrium where elevated and biological civilizations coexisted in parallel realities that occasionally intersected, but mostly developed independently. The biological worlds became nature preserves of a sort, carefully maintained environments where traditional forms of consciousness could explore their own evolutionary paths. Meanwhile, elevated civilization expanded beyond the galaxy itself, making contact with the ancient minds that existed between stars and beginning the long process of preparing for challenges.